Okay, we are live. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Dr. Nathan Langrad, Chief Education Officer at WeVideo, and we are here today for an especially important conversation about race, equity, and justice in education. And I'm so honored to host this conversation today and to be joined by a remarkable group of educators. So let me make introductions. We have Dwight Carter. He is currently the Eastland Career Center Assistant Director. He's in the Jostens Renaissance Educator Hall of Fame. He's a 2015 Ohio Alliance of Black School Educators Principal of the Year, a 2013 NASSP Digital Principal of the Year, an author and a speaker. We also welcome Dwight. We also have Shayla Glover. She is the social studies teacher at Olentangy Liberty High School. She's a varsity girls golf coach and AP reader. She's a University of Dayton and the Ohio State University graduate with 10 years working in the education field. Welcome, Shayla. We also have Tia Holliman. Tia is the curriculum director with Gahanna Jefferson Schools. She has been in education for 17 years, and she spent 10 years in the classroom as a high school math teacher, and she says that she will always be a teacher at the core. And I can definitely relate to that, Tia. Thank you for joining. We also have Derek McCoy. He is the new proud principal of North Asheboro Middle School in North Carolina. Yes. Are we first to announce that, Derek? He's also the NASSP Digital Principal of the Year, an author and a speaker. Welcome, Derek. We also have Jessica Williams, and she is the principal of Gahanna Lincoln High School. Welcome, Jessica. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here today. So just a quick note about the format for today. Our panelists will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we will have an open Q&A time from you, the participants who are watching right now. If you'd like to ask a question, all you have to do is click on the Q&A button, and the questions will automatically be sorted based on the number of votes for each question. So that's the format for today, and we are going to jump right into the questions. So our first question today is, how do we create a school culture that promotes diversity and racial equity? And Tia, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. So the first thing is it definitely has to be embedded in your everyday practices. It's not a one and done. It's not an offshoot celebration here or there. Very intentional education and celebration of the different cultures and the different people who are within your building and within the world, because we know all buildings have different makeups. I think it starts by really evaluating your instructional resources and your text to make sure that the characters, to make sure that the stories represent the people that are in the buildings and the people that are in the world. And especially when we're talking about our people of color, that the stories go beyond just oppression and overcoming adversity, but truly just celebrating everyday experiences and the richness that each person brings. It is very important for students to be able to see themselves and see the world within their instructional resources. Diversifying your staff for sure. I think, we talk about representation all the time, and kids need regular examples of greatness in people that look like them and people that look like others, because that helps to foster and cultivate the greatness in themselves. And then they're able to also celebrate. And I think bringing in people to share their stories, having the students, the staff share their stories, and just making that a regular part of the everyday experiences is how you celebrate and continue to cultivate that.
Phenomenal. Jessica, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would echo everything Tia has said. The one thing I would add there is, school culture is that one thing, that term that we use over and over again, right? And setting that foundation of what is school culture, and to steal a line from Brian Kite, school culture is three things: is what you believe, how you behave, and the experiences that you give and receive with each other. So we have to get to the core values of who we are, right? And that's addressing our implicit bias, addressing our systemic oppression and racism within our curriculum or within our school system and structure. So once we can identify what we believe as a school, it drives those behaviors, right? And it creates those experiences. If I have a belief as an educator that when a certain type of student walks through my door, this is the experience that they're going to give me. They're going to be lazy. They're not going to be on time. They're going to be loud. Those are the things that drive my behaviors towards that particular student or staff member, right? And so those are the things that I think, at the foundation that have to be addressed in order to promote that diversity and racial equity within the culture. And it's just continuous work. It's not easy work. Anything as deep rooted as the issues that we're discussing right now is going to get you dirty. Just like working in your garden and you're trying to pull that weed that's deep rooted, you're going to get a little messy. You're going to get sweaty. It's going to be uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, these are things that we have to engage in. And I think establishing those foundations, what it is that we believe drives how we behave, that creates those experiences that we give and receive with each other.
Tia and Jessica, both of the thoughts that you shared really resonate with me. And I'm thinking about with curriculum and also with HR practices and ensuring diversity. Dwight, I want to kind of pass this, same question to you, but can you kind of tackle, a lot of times we're given a curriculum or we're given maybe a candidate, a pool of candidates to choose from. How do we kind of challenge that status quo instead of just saying we need to challenge it? How do we do something different so we actually can address racism and equity and justice?
Yeah, I think first you have to examine the biases that may exist in the hiring process in the first place, and be honest about that. And so anytime you have a systemic gap in hiring, look at, what are the barriers that exist in the district that prevents, diverse groups of people from even applying. Then go to where Black and minority students attend schools to recruit. And one of the things so personal experience, when I was coming out of college, I wanted to go back and teach at the high school where I graduated from. At that time, the district made a strong concerted effort to recruit Black and minority students, Black and brown students. But they spent a lot of time recruiting from down south. So we had a whole slew of teachers from down south come to Central Ohio to teach. But within a year or two, this is a word I got from the superintendent at the time. And again, this was like 26 years ago. They went through a riff. Most of the students were let go. And there were no wraparound services to support students coming from down south, completely different culture to the Midwest. So they're away from family, away from friends, didn't understand, just couldn't navigate through Central Ohio. So they returned home. And so there was that, yes, from the outset, it looked good and it was good to recruit Black and brown students, but where's the support for that? And so I think districts have to think about what are our supports that we have to not just recruit but retain teachers of color. And then the third thing is start working now with universities to build partnerships so that there can be a pipeline of applicants that are qualified, not hired just because they're Black and brown, but hired in addition to them being Black or brown. And so we may think at times that Black or brown applicants only want to teach in a Black or brown school. While that may be the case, it also may be opportunity where they just want to teach in a position where we're treated fairly, respectfully, and we can make a difference. Ultimately, we go into education because we want to make a difference. Mm-hmm. We want to make a difference with our own, but we want to make a difference, period, because research shows that students who have diverse teachers have a much broader experience, have a different experience. And so I think we add so much more to the education other than the curriculum that we can teach. It's the relationships that we establish. And that's just my own personal experience as well.
Absolutely.
Very insightful. Go ahead, jump in there, Derek.
So, another piece of that, and this is as personal as it can get, because this is a part of my story. Growing up as in a family from an impoverished family, I wanted to go to college and get a job where I can make a lot of money, and I know that teachers are broke, and there's a lot of jaded stories out there about teachers not being happy. So let's look at all of that. Do we consider as educators right now, with potential teachers in front of you, are you giving a story or giving a narrative that, hey, you can become a teacher, you can have a good life, and you can make a difference? So are we right now capitalizing on opportunities to build the teacher forces that we need to help future generations? I heard some of that coming up, but I didn't hear a lot of that coming up. So I make a point right now when we're talking to teachers, to students right now, and yeah, we're talking, STEM engineers and the whole nine. What do you like to do? What you like to talk? Guess what you do as a teacher? I like building relationships. Guess what you do? This it's not all about. If I had somebody, more people like that in my own K-12 experience. I love my political science degree, but I would have gone straight into education, and it would have been different, especially somebody dispelling all those myths. So yeah, us being intentional right now with our teacher forces, middle school, high school people, and elementary, create dreamers and let them build.
Can I just piggyback off of that too? Because I totally agree. And if you think about even some of the reasons why people have the thoughts that they do around schools and what teachers do, is because it's coming from their own personal experiences. And so when you talk about like helping to support our future educators that are sitting in front of us, like we definitely have to think about, even starting pre-K on up, what is the experience, their school experience like for them, that would help them to want to become a teacher. I was blessed to have wonderful teachers, which is what helped me to determine that that's the path that I wanted to go. But we know that we have a number of students who say they don't like school, and there are reasons that they don't like school. And it's not always just because the schoolwork is challenging for them. So definitely, I agree with Derek. Like, we have to be feeding into the students as early as kindergarten, preschool, and what they can do, and make sure that their experience is a positive one. And that'll encourage more of them to want to be teachers.
Yeah. And I was just chiming in on what Derek and Tia said, is just, changing the narrative. We have to stop talking about how tired we are. Mm-hmm. We have to stop talking about how hard it is. We have to stop talking about how we're treated by, we're viewed as a less than profession. That may be an element out there, but that's not the true whole story. We have to start promoting, the thank you cards that we get from 20 students we had 20 or 30 years ago. Introducing them they want to introduce their families to us because we made a difference. Just sharing those aha and those wow moments and those experiences, as Jessica talked about culture. Culture is, the experience that you have wherever in that particular school or organization. Is our culture one that celebrates diversity through experience and acceptance and connection? Or is it a culture of, man, we barely made it through, culture of struggle? Like, if that's the culture, then why would anybody want to be attracted to that?
Right.
Yeah, most definitely. I just would like to add that I completely agree with what the panel has already been saying, but I think we also have to model that behavior. When our students come in, do they see us excited? Do they see us well prepared? Do they see us wanting to actually not just do our jobs, but to do our jobs well and have passion for what we do? It's not easy for us to be in a high school setting and be at the school, at 7 a.m, and you're dealing with tired teenagers, but you can make an impact by just your level of enthusiasm for what you're teaching and for what you're doing and for the passion for the kids. because I know from personal experience from my own students, when they write notes to me and say, thank you for being, energized in the morning. I didn't want to come in at 7:15, but I was ready because you were ready. Those little things we oftentimes forget about, but they have such a huge impact on the kids that we're dealing with. I think that is something that we need to constantly keep in our minds, is that, we have a passion for this profession. That's why we chose it. And if we want our students to become involved, then we ourselves have to push ourselves in, especially in the morning.
Mm-hmm. I think I just want to add one last thing, and that's speaking from personal experience. And so to all those listening this afternoon, if you don't have someone in your school that you connect with or represents your culture or your ethnicity, knowing that education is a great way to change community. Like, you too can be a change agent, right? Even if you don't have that powerful example represented in the staff that makes up your school, right? And speaking from my own personal experience, because I went to a predominantly white school, K through 10th grade, right? And I didn't have those examples, but the experiences, the negative experiences I had, that's the driver for who I am today, right? To be that change for kids, to be the voice for the voiceless, to be the underdog's advocate, because I didn't have that same experience when I was going through school. So I think, on that other side, when you don't have it, you can be it as well.
Well, and Jessica, thank you for being that catalyst for change and and for saying that. And it's actually a great kind of segue for where I want this conversation to go next, because as educators, we all have an impact on the school culture, which we've talked a lot about in the first section of this conversation. But we sometimes forget the tremendous influence and impact we have on the community around us. Because many times the community looks towards the school and the district for direction and for guidance. So the next question is going to be really focused on community. How do we engage with the community to create conversations around racism, equity, and justice? And Jessica, how about we start with you, since we ended with you in the last question?
Absolutely. Again, speaking from personal experience, in 2020, when someone feels comfortable coming up to me and saying that statistics show that light-skinned people, i.e. white people, are smarter than dark-skinned people, i.e. black people, it's time for us to sit down and have that conversation as a community. Because to walk up to me as the leader of the institution in your district and feel comfortable enough to say that, I think we have to leverage platforms such as this to bring awareness to it, but also take action. I mean, conversation is fantastic, but what are going to be those action steps? I think leveraging our local Board of Educations and our local leaders is another way to start engaging in these conversations with the community, facilitating town hall style meetings. And then lastly, I would say, is listening to people's experiences. I shared this yesterday with our leadership team, is just, it's okay to listen to other people's experiences and not discount those. I've shared a couple of my experiences. Those are things that you can definitely learn from. The books that, people are engaging in book studies in are fantastic, but there's something to be said when you hear a heart-wrenching story from someone who has experienced inequity, injustice, racism, that kind of helps to shift your perspective a little bit. It hits home a little closer than that text might. So, we have to name the root causes of these inequities, the injustice, the racism. We have to name the root causes, although it's uncomfortable. Like I said before, anything as deep rooted as this is going to take a lot of uncomfortable, hard work. And as leaders, just modeling that inquiry approach to improvement, asking the questions. I live in this mindset in this world of, so what? Now what, right? Like you can bring me any problem or data in the world. So what? Now what? Now what are we going to do to be better than we were today, the last hour we were? So now is the time for us to impact change and leverage these conversations in the community, because if someone is comfortable in 2020 saying that to me, then it's time.
Absolutely. I think so what now what's going to be my mantra now. It's phenomenal. Dwight, I know you work a lot with the career center, so I assume that has a lot of connections with the community. So do you also find that you're able to have those conversations in the community?
Because all of this is new, like so I'm gonna preface it with through, a framework that I want to put it in. I think we're in a CAT framework, meaning cope, adjust, transform. So, we had a number of issues with Breonna Taylor. We had George Floyd that was very much in your face, like blatant murder, videotaped, everyone saw it, and now everyone's reacting to that. Now we're coping with what we saw. We're coping with what we experienced. There's a lot of trauma that comes from what we all saw, because now it taps into maybe experiences that we had, that we maybe buried, and again, nothing close to what happened to George Floyd, but experiences that led up to potentially what happened to George Floyd. Just racism in and of itself. I think Jessica touched on that a little bit, where somebody had the nerve, the audacity, and the gall just to say, what they said about blacks and whites, one being inferior to the other. It's like we've gone back 50 years in terms of what's acceptable, culturally acceptable behavior when it comes to interaction as humans. So right now we're coping with this drastic, blatant level of disrespect that we're experiencing. We're coping with it. So now we have the rush to buy all these books and have these book studies and engage in these deep conversations in public. But what are the conversations like in private?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what, like, whites need to have these hard conversations with themselves in private, where the guards are down, the vulnerabilities are down, and people are being who they really are. And so those who are, anti-racist can say, that's offensive and here's why, and then start to educate that way. So we're getting to the question of small groups. Small groups are eventually, we're going to get to the point where we're adjusting our practices, because we're going through the coping stage. The adjusting to now what the new normal has to be is focusing on behaviors, practices, policies, and procedures. Policies and procedures don't change hearts. They change behavior. And that's what we want to change behavior. And then hopefully the heart will follow, because it takes a lot longer to change someone's heart than to change someone's behavior. So engaging in small group conversations to break down the walls and have the hard conversations about what's acceptable behavior based on the culture that we want to create. Is it a culture of equity? Is it a culture of acceptance? Is it a culture of justice? Is it a culture of fairness? And if it is, what does that really look like? And then being comfortable confronting it when that's not happening on a one-to-one basis, not necessarily in a large group setting, because you can hide in the large group setting. One-on-one, you can't hide. It's just you and the other person. And that's where change starts to happen, when you have the one-on-one conversation. It rarely happens in a large, like a speech can be moving. It's motivational. It's a swelling, but swellings go down.
Yeah.
And then you go back to what's comfortable. We have to have the smaller group. And that's where I think having using the platforms that are already established, like Nathan, you mentioned, our career centers, we already have advisory boards. Now we can utilize those advisory boards to start asking, what's your diversity look like in your organization or in your company? And what are the practices that you have to hire? And then what are the biases that may exist? Because there's that relationship there. So then you can start transforming individuals, then transforming organizations, and transforming communities. And that's where then the transformation part comes in, where we start looking at transforming our mindset after we've coped, adjusted to it. Now we're in transformation stage. But this is a long haul. This is not a flash in the pan experience. I hope it's for the long haul.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll put it that way.
Dwight, it was an eye opener whenever the whole thing was, but especially what resonated the most was when you phrased this as, what are the conversations you're having in your home? What are those small group conversations? Because I think when I think about community, I think about the town halls, I think about the powerful speeches, but what happens when people walk away from that speech? What then? Derek, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too, because I saw a lot of facial expressions happening with you whenever Dwight was speaking as well.
And I'm so transparent that way, you know. It's just whatever is
Thank you.
going up here is going to come out some kind of way, you know. Horrible poker player, by the way. Yeah. So to kind of trail off of what Dwight was saying, it's just a new era now. You know, I'm 50 years old. So coming along, growing up, it was the norm, or it was accepted to not talk about some things. You know, we don't. We have to be polite about some things, but it's just a formal way to accept what's intolerable and what's unjust. And now, what I'm so excited about, particularly, you know, for my kids, my own kids, and the kids that we teach, is that they know the norm for them. They know is to address that. They know to address what's coming up, to identify, and to say what's offensive, and then to put. It's exactly what anti-racism is. Anti-racism is putting bricks on somebody's back. Okay, anti-racism, that's intentional work. Anti-racism is intentionally taking bricks off somebody's back. So that's an exciting part about where we are now. Is that's the realization where we are. But getting back to the question, Nathan, how do we engage? What do we do, and how do we start those talks and getting people to understand that part? I'm excited to talk about my personal piece in that. You know, I'm starting a new school, and my previous schools have looked one certain way, but I'm coming to a school now that has a very high Hispanic population. Okay, and given what's going on right now, we have to have a talk about this. So I have to know my community. So how do we engage our community? Know your community. And it doesn't matter if your community, what your demographics are, heavy this or heavy that. Every community has to start having these communications, these talks right now. Every community. We have to have a good mission for that. So I know that I'm going to go in with my mission, and my goal is for every child to be safe and to be an advocate, and to be and when we need to be an activist for what is right and what is good. So not just to go to the community, and I love what you said earlier, just about having town halls. Not just to have a town hall at my school and stand on the auditorium and check I've done my part. Go into the community where people live, let them feel safe. Not them come to the school and hope they feel safe. Go to the community where they are and let them feel safe, and let them bring up what needs to be brought up. And then we talk about that flatly, because I'm not there to, with understanding, I'm not there to push my agenda or to really adopt to their agenda. We're there to build conversations that will help students be safe, build a great world, and hopefully help us throughout the process. We have to define all these things in good. We have to define all these things: equity, justice, in good, great, acceptable. Not accept. I'm sorry. Acceptable is the wrong word. Good, great, understandable terms, so that everybody has a good common definition, that we're all aligned to. What does equity mean? What does justice mean? Not I'll accept this for justice. What does justice mean? Because whether we fight for some equitable practices now or not, we can know what they are, and whether we get them to next week or next year, we know what they are, so we'll fight for them. But if we have a different definition of equity and justice, then our fights are going to look different, and then we're going to accept, somebody's going to accept this when somebody else wants this, and that causes huge rifts as well. So we have to know what we want to say, have to have some commonly defined terms, and then I know we're going to talk about this later, but it can't just be talked at. You have to provide some resources and provide some understanding. So we have to really know ourselves and know our mission when we go and start these talks.
We sure do. You're absolutely right. And I keep thinking what Jessica said, opening up this question, as you were talking, Derek, it's okay, so what, now what? You know, like, what is it? What does equity mean for our school? What does being anti-racist mean? And so then what are we going to do about it? And actually is a great segue into our next question is, you know, what are some resources to help parents promote anti-racist messages? You know, it's one thing to say we have to address racism in our schools, but we need to equip parents with those resources. And this obviously goes back to the community as well, equipping the community to act and have those conversations in the home. So I'll go to Shayla. Do you have any resources to share for parents?
Yes. So first, I think that it is a parent has to make a conscious effort to really want to learn about these anti-racist messages. And they really have to want to take on exposing their children to that. So I think that's the first step before we even talk about, you know, what resources are available, is to make this conscious effort of implicit bias, understanding racism and prejudice and discrimination. From there, I would say parent needs age appropriate resources. I'm a high school teacher, so that's going to clearly look different from a child in elementary school. But studies show that children as young as age 3, age 4 can categorically see differences between races. So there really is no time rather than the present and beginning at a young age to start teaching these messages to children. For me as a high school teacher, I would of course, you know, recommend resources such as Teaching Tolerance, the Southern Poverty Law Center. There's several documentaries. One in particular I show with my classes is Eyes on the Prize. It's been out for quite a long time, but I show some of those segments, and those are really good at giving documentaries and giving actual specific firsthand accounts so students can learn from that. Of course, there's always books that can be used. I think right now, as what Dwight was saying, we're in that area of coping and we need to have resources. So there's been this huge push of resources on the internet, you know, how to not be racist. You could probably Google that and you'll come up with a plethora of resources that can enable you to teach that to your child, whether it's text or books, whether it's documentaries, movies, and so forth from there. But I also think that one of the things we have to do is listen. You know, a parent can listen to their minority friends. And I think that's also another thing is, do they have minority friends? And asking them, you know, what are your experiences? You know, what do you necessarily recommend? Because there is sometimes, especially in Hollywood, that white savior within films that's going to sweep in and make all the changes, and now Black people are successful. And we don't want to push that narrative. We really don't want to do that.
Man, Shayla, you preaching.
Yeah. You know, if I can just add this, you know, to address what you said, Shayla, about these messages from preschool. I mean, I just finished reading White Fragility, and it was an eye opener. And some of the things that were mentioned in the book, is, you know, from birth. I mean, the healthcare system, the systemic racism in the healthcare system, and then with preschool, with books and curriculum. And it's just, even from an early age, the system is at work. And so I'm really appreciative that you can expose that even early on. So we have to be able to start at the earliest age possible to kind of unravel these things.
Hey Nathan, if I can recommend a resource, a podcast, Code Switch on NPR. It is so informative. They share a lot of primary sources. They combine those with current, contemporary conversations and resources, and we even tell a phenomenal story. of the institutionalized racism that exists, and then individual racism experiences that have. But then they constantly, talk about, okay, what are we going to do about it now? What are the next steps? So it's not just informational; it's also some practical steps there. So for those who don't want to read or don't feel like they have time to read, I mean, everyone has the time to listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
Another one I recommend is The Breakdown by Sean King. I know some may not be open to that, but we have to hear, we have to listen to voices that make us uncomfortable, especially now. So that's something that those are two that I listen to quite often. I don't always agree with everything that's on each podcast, but it's not about whether I agree or not. It's about am I educating myself, so I can just be better equipped for me. And I think if we're open to it, then we can learn from anything. We can learn why we may disagree with it, and further solidify our point, or we can say, man, that really challenged my thinking. Let me dive into that a little bit more.
Thank you for mentioning those resources. And just for our participants, we will have those resources listed in the chat. And this is also being recorded and will live on the WeVideo webinars page. So if you're like trying to write these resources down, like I was just now, just know that we are going to have those resources for you. Any other resources for the panel to share?
So Nathan, I just wanted to add, it's not a specific resource in terms of like a tangible thing, but I think about so one of the things that I always love here in Central Ohio is in the summertime, before COVID, was all of the festivals and all of the celebrations that would happen that represented all different types of cultures throughout the summer. And I think that, there are tons of things that happen throughout the year where people are celebrating themselves that's open to the greater community. And and a lot of it, like you said, like Shayla had mentioned, of course, with all of the tangible resources that were listed, those are phenomenal, the book studies and things, but then moving it into practice and actually being able to reflect on your own experiences and how you fit in what you're reading, you have to go and you have to listen and you have to put yourself a part of something that's larger than just you or what you're comfortable with. And so I think there are tons of free experiences or minimal, things that are minimally cost experiences out there that allow you to see people that are different than you. And that difference can be anything, right? And how they celebrate and how they love and how they're speaking to each other and just and how they live. Putting yourself in those experiences so that you can start to build your narrative that's different than what you might see on TV or what you might see on social media or what you might read in the book. Like I said before, it's not like our story is a story of oppression. We're talking about racism. There's a lot of evil that's happening, but there's also a lot of good that has come out of it. And we're a strong people, and there's reasons behind them. There's reasons why we celebrate, right? And it's like you have to open yourself up to be able to celebrate, to then be comfortable with sharing that message and supporting your kids through that.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Tia. Go ahead, Derek.
So just a couple more pieces. I'll some resources here myself. But we know as educators how powerful it is to have relevant resources for students, for students to start certain conversations. So one of the books that I read personally, and we had a couple of teachers try this a couple of years ago, the Hate You Give, and I think this was they made this to a movie. That's right. So it's not a 20-30-year-old story. It's contemporary. I should say the movie makes it, they make it more contemporary. Having resources like that to share out, like you were saying, Shayla, that you can share out to your family, particularly show struggle and then the work towards that fits the anti-racist theme is important. Another organization that I used to follow, I follow them, but for a time I had to follow the message pretty strongly because of some things that were going on with the Center for Racial Justice. They got a Twitter account. They have a very active and Their resources are awesome. They will come to your school to do some stuff. They are all about coming into communities. Great things, just tremendously great things. Now, and I know that this question is about resources for parents, but I just want to put it out there because my PLN, my professional learning network, has made such a big difference for me. I just want to put some Twitter accounts out there for you all, for other educators. These some people to follow, and they might put some content out there that might help you with the conversation that you need or want to go. So, Sine Bell, awesome warrior in Texas. Pedro Noguera, out in California. Rosa Perez, Jose Vilson up in Philly. Mike Dropper, Sharif El Mekki, he's also in Philly. He was a charter school principal, but now he's doing a teacher prep program for African Americans. Basil Marin, James Ford, Shantae Garrett. These are some great people. They have a great focus for all the topics that we're talking about right now. My PLN helps make me smarter, so connect with these people and connect with people. Don't just tweet. Start a conversation with them and then let them help grow and make some difference.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Derek. And we were really lucky to have Sine Bell and Rosa Isaiah Perez on our platform a couple of weeks ago talking about leadership through COVID. So I'm happy to can expand my PLN with the new names that you've mentioned. So thank you for sharing. So let's pivot to thinking about our students, because we know that our students also have thoughts about these issues, and we want to, obviously as educators, we want to amplify their voice. So the next question is, how do we amplify student voice about these issues? And we will start with Tia.
Yeah. So the first thing, we definitely have to really genuinely listen to what our students have to say, know that they do have something to say about it, and listen to what they have to say. Listen to understand where their experiences come, where they're coming from, and then ultimately be prepared to act on what they tell us. I think a lot of the times, I think from a curriculum lens in this work, especially when it comes to the voice of our students, and we have to make sure that we are intentionally creating the space for them to be comfortable to be able to share, and that they feel like they're going to be supported. One example I can pull, we started last year with our elementary buildings, for example, do morning meetings, and they do it every day, and it's a space for students to connect with each other and connect with their teacher, to share their feelings, to talk about some things. There's some definitely skill building things that happen in there, but it's a way to build that connection, to kind of center themselves and get ready for learning. But it's that space for like I said, connection and growth within each other. So things like that help even from our littlest kids to be able to see that they have a safe space to be able to share, acknowledge their feelings, and help them to kind of process that. I think beyond that, like I said, from a curricular lens and thinking about the learning experiences that we provide, because as it was mentioned earlier before, and when we talk about the community, people look to schools to help to support this work and to help them to learn in all capacities, and especially for our students. We're charged with developing the next leaders, the next educators, the next doctors. We're charged with developing global citizens, right? So we have to make sure that our learning experiences are helping to truly promote that for kids. If we want them to think deeply, if we want them to find their voice and to be able to share their voice and share their thoughts and it be heard and resonate with different audiences and understand how to get that message across to different audiences, we have to give them experiences that really develop those skills. And sometimes I know that can be challenging, but when you really think about the curriculum, whether it's a box curriculum or you have free range, there's always opportunities to let kids voice in there and help them to process and reflect on whether it's historical content that's connected to current events or vice versa, whatever. And in any arena, I was a math teacher and there were still connections through the math and that problem solving and critical thinking that could be pulled in. So we have to make sure that we're intentional about building those spaces and those learning experiences and supporting kids through that.
Awesome. I love that you mentioning morning meeting, because I think it's really a wonderful time to connect with students and being able to kind of start the day on a positive note and on an intentional note. Shayla, what are your thoughts on amplifying student voices?
I agree with a lot with what Tia had to say. I think, having students being able to have a safe environment in which they can, share their voice. I think for me as a government teacher, I really try to push students to first learn their voice and then use that to try to deliver a message. I've always told my students that there is strength in numbers. The school in which I happen to teach at is 2,000 students, over 2,000. There's over 500 students in the last graduating class for 2020. I always tell them, imagine what happens if all of you showed up to a school board meeting, what you could do. And they start to think about, wow, this is a small room and we have half of our class, say 250 kids show up amplifying something. Then they're learning their voice and learn that they have power within their voice. So I think that's one of the first steps. I think secondly, as a government teacher, teaching them about direct and indirect action. Just this past week, I received an email from some students that happened to be at one of the Black Lives Matter protests here in Columbus, Ohio. And nothing made me prouder as a government teacher for them to say, thank you for teaching us these skills about our liberties and what rights we have under the law. And then for them to take that message to the streets, no matter what that happens to be. In this case, it's Black Lives Matter. But just to see them put that message into action and speak on something that's so important to them just makes me, ecstatic as a government teacher that they're choosing to do that. And then have conversations with their friends, have conversations with their family members, and back that up with data and back that up with numbers and back that up with, the facts that we've seen from systemic racism and oppression over the years. I just want the students to know that they have a voice and that they can definitely use that to their advantage. As I've told them, movements begin with the young people, and I'm so proud of Generation Z for, in particularly, leading the way in this message.
That's phenomenal. Shayla, I wish I had a teacher like you when I was in school, and to know that I had a teacher that believed in me and was able to share my voice. So thank you for being such a teacher, such a caring and sincere teacher.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jessica, what are your thoughts on amplifying student voice?
Well, after those two dynamic,
Right?
I'm not sure I have much to add, but I think what I will say is, amplifying their voices in these conversations, coming from a principal lens is so important. As Shayla mentioned with Gen Z, is following their lead, just listening to them. But one thing I will say is that it's not enough for them to be a part of the conversations, but they have to be a part of the action planning of what those next steps will be. And I think following their lead in that is so important. I think, again, from a principal's lens in a school setting, it is important for our teachers to hear our students' voices. It's important for our community to hear our students' voices and their experiences. And it's also important for students to hear other students' voices and experiences. And, what that looks like, I don't know, but just off the top of my head, a panel of students with varying perspectives. Yes, they may all be Black and brown, but one thing that we must remember is that people can be of the same race, but culturally different, right? So all of us are of the same race here on the panel, but we're all culturally different. And that's what brings in that different perspective. So having a student panel of, different perspectives is so important for people to hear their experiences. And it goes back to what we said earlier, listening, right? Not discounting the stories that these kids tell us, not discounting their experiences. They're real. They have wounds that are open. Trauma is there that hasn't been addressed because sometimes we don't even think of this as traumatic experiences for these kids. And so, it is important to recognize that even with the imagery that they're seeing online right now, I've worried I've been worried senseless about those who are survivors of police brutality, survivors of systemic oppression, survivors of racism, because the images that they're seeing now they can serve as a trigger, that's for sure, right? And reopen those wounds. And so I just think, for me, when I get back to school with students, I would love to sit down with my principal's advisory group and put something of this magnitude together and let them drive the action planning. Where they lead us, we shall go. I'm just there as a guide, an adult along the side to help them, but I want them to lead us in amplifying their voices about these issues.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica. Eric, go ahead.
And just very quickly, it's hard to follow after all that mic dropping, but Barbara Bray, if you read about Barbara Bray, she talks a lot about personalized learning, but more about student agency. When she talks about student leadership and student agency, she puts activism as one of the highest rungs. Student activism is one of the highest rungs of evidenced student leadership that there is. So when we write about student empowerment, we want to cultivate an activist, an advocate, and a student who can get knowledgeable on a topic that they're passionate about and can communicate and advocate for that topic. So if for no other reason to want to be on a mission to amplify student voice, to ensure that students are heard, we ought to be on a mission to empower students so that we can grow leadership, so that we can grow the advocates that our communities absolutely need.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Derek. And really along those lines about student activism and student agency, we're going to jump over into the audience questions. And I'm going to start with the question that has the highest number of votes. And this comes from Chris. And Chris asks, as an educator, I think it's important to have discussions with white students about these systems of oppression that they're unaware that they exist in. At the same time, I'm aware that continuing to bring up these issues can be reopening wounds for students of color in such a public space. How do you balance these conversations so that those who need to hear it do without harming those who live it? And we'll jump over to Dwight for this question.
Okay. Well, that's a great question. You have to lean into it. And so I think before you engage in those conversations, you have to have a rapport with the kids. Like, hands down, relationships have to be tight, respectful, and there has to be very clear norms and expectations in the classroom. With knowing Chris, that is there, and I know he has those conversations. And so I think he can be a great model for how to go about doing that. I'll also say this. Take advantage and look at what the arts do, especially the performing arts, when it comes to having those tough conversations. Safe spaces are created, vulnerability is a part of the norm, expression is a part of the norm. And so I think establishing the norms up front with the understanding that we're going to have some tough conversations. It's okay to get emotional around it, because those emotions are real. So teaching kids to lean into their emotions, because the feelings are real, and then supporting that opportunity and that chance for that emotion to come out. But then in advance, partnering with, the school counselors, and if you have other social emotional staff members, school psychologists, and so forth and so on, get them involved in the conversation as well. Get them involved in terms of a wraparound, I've used this phrase before, wraparound service, so that the kids can process that emotion that's happening, and then be able to move forward in the next step. Not move on, because moving on is like forget it and it's there. Moving forward is, I know that's still there and I'm still going ahead. And so I think, and it may come up as an impromptu conversation, just a random question, and boom, you now have a whole new lesson. Roll with it, and then just kind of work through the emotions and establishing relationships, but constantly checking in on your students and saying, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And then if there's an additional support that's needed, then you have specifics on what type of support is needed. And then, obviously communicate at home. Say, hey, we had this conversation today. I'm just making you aware. you know, my son or daughter, your son or daughter may be upset, but here's what came out of it and here's why. So parents are involved. Teacher relationship with the students is paramount. And then you have other educators in the building who are maybe specialized in that area to work with you and walk with you along the way.
So Nathan, just to add a resource to this piece, Chris, if you're listening, you may something that may help you is researching. It's called curriculum violence. There was just an article put out this week about ending curriculum violence. It made me go and research it. It's a powerful graphic that starts the article. And the author describes how the teacher wanted to. The teacher put put cotton plants on everybody's desks, and it was just so to let everybody see the process of picking cotton. The image is obviously the image and the memory that the students classroom, that's described as curriculum violence. So you might want to research that topic, learn some nuances there. It made me go back. I hadn't heard it before I read it, but so I got myself a little bit smarter on it just this week. So maybe that as a research topic can help you frame that piece, because conversations got to happen, but we got to, like Dwight said, got to lean into it, got to be smart about it, and got to absolutely utilize your relationships as best you can.
And Nathan, I have a very quick story.
Yeah, please.
I was principal at Lincoln High School when Trayvon Martin was killed. And it was traumatic for our kids because he looked like our kids. I mean, he was younger than our kids, you know. Hoodie, you know, he wore a hoodie, carrying Skittles, basically was just attacked and killed. And then, you know, it was maddening, it was hurtful. And I remember 3 young ladies came to my office and they were adamant. They wanted action. They wanted to do something. And I said, okay, what do you guys, tell me what you want to do. We want to wear hoodies and protest. And I said, that's fine, but then what? Like, you wear a hoodie for a day, you want people to question you, and then you come off and you're mad that you're wearing a hoodie. But then still in Jessica's line, I didn't say it at the time, but so what, now what? So, and then they came with some other ideas, and I felt like, okay, I need help with this. So I went to people who are especially strong in this area and had strong rapport with our kids. Tia Holliman, Donnell Amerson, Danya Thomas, and Kia Germany. I said, you know, here's some ideas, talk to them. And to this day, diaspora is phenomenal at Gahanna Lincoln High School. It is well known in Central Ohio because those young ladies wanted to take deliberate, intentional action with the guidance and support and care and nurturing of adults who wanted to see them succeed. They didn't take it over. And now I applaud them, but this is happening in the classroom as well. They didn't take over the conversation or take over the activity or the event or the historical moment they wanted to create. They helped guide the students so they can own it. And now it's truly student owned, student led, student supported, and it's a phenomenal experience. Phenomenal experience.
Well, Dwight, thank you for sharing that story. That's powerful. Okay, we have one more question. We have time for one more question. And honestly, I wish that we could stay longer because this is extremely beneficial, powerful experience for myself, and I know for our listeners. The last question that we'll go to next is the one with the next amount of votes. And this comes from Camille. Camille asks, how can we encourage creating a school culture as an individual teacher who's in a school with leadership and teachers who their views are not in line with justice and equity? And we'll start with Shayla here because I think Shayla has some thoughts on this, and then anyone else who wants to add on to Shayla's comments.
I think first we have to just demonstrate that there's actually a need for this. And so I know from my own experience as a social studies teacher, the content standards in Ohio discuss teaching from multiple perspectives. And AP programs, international baccalaureate programs do that as well. So I think sometimes as a teacher, we're nervous to have these conversations, but the standards are actually there in support of this. So I always felt that in discussing tough conversations, well, how does this align to the standards? Because if someone wants to call me out or, charge on something, I can say it's here, blah, 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 in this standard, and I'm expanding upon it from there. I think the second thing is you can't be afraid to be a change agent, and what you're doing is the right thing to do. Because these lessons are needed for our students so that they can become better aware of whether it's the privilege that they have or the privilege that they don't have, so we can form a better citizenry so that in 50 years, we're not having these same conversations.
Absolutely.
I would just piggyback on that, because I definitely agree. And I think she kind of hit the nail on the head. So there's not much more to say. But you think about it, when you are an individual teacher who wants to try a new instructional strategy or a new resource that you're bringing in, there's not a lot of question there. You try it, you see if it works, and then you start to share it with maybe your PLC or your grade level team, or, maybe even just a partner. You start to have conversations about like the results that you're seeing within your classroom. It's the same idea. Sometimes, though, I think a lot of the times where we struggle when it comes to social justice, racial justice, those kinds of things, is because we haven't really settled into our own biases, and we're afraid because there's still a lot that we don't know. So you also have to start within yourself. And make sure that you have that reflection and you're ready and prepared to take on the charge. But absolutely, as Shayla said, you have to do that change agent. And even if it starts with one, we know your kids are getting it, it'll begin to grow, but you can't stop from there.
I would also say, just chiming in, I think we can all agree that racism is something that needs to change. Yeah. Conservative, liberal, I don't think that really, racism is an issue. We need to address it. And I hope we can all agree, nationally, that racism is a bad thing. It's in the fabric of the foundation of our country. And as a result of that, this is where we are now. In 2020, we're having these conversations that, again, hopefully, or should have been resolved years ago, but they're not. And so I think if we can just agree, because I'm addressing a specific question about living in a conservative, community, we should be able to all agree that racism is not a good thing, regardless of political stance, regardless of SES, regardless of cultural differences or norms or behaviors. Is something that needs to be addressed. And I think it starts with the one-on-one conversations, and it can't start with one person. Start with that one person, talk to one teacher, or work with a small group of kids, and then let it go from there. As I said, this is a long haul, long journey process. It is not a sprint by any way, any stretch of the imagination. And if it's viewed as a sprint, we're gonna be back here again.
We're dealing with centuries of oppression. We can't change centuries of oppression overnight.
No. I'd also like to say that this is Camille, I think. We've all been on Twitter, and slightly change the subject. We've all been on Twitter chats where we've been talking about like an instructional strategy, like standards-based grading or something, whatever. And somewhere in that chat, there's one person that says, I'm the only one in my school that feels like this. Then somebody in that chat will say, oh, we're here. Camille, let me say this to you directly. You might be the only person in the building who feels like that right now. But like everybody else says, we know that this is wrong. You are there for a reason, because of what you believe. So if you need support or at least help, reach out to your PLN, find a like-minded spirit. Support doesn't always have to be face-to-face. Right. Some of my best support has been over the phone or through some DMs. So find somebody like-minded, and I promise you that's the great thing about PLNs. There is somebody like-minded who will help you. DM me. I'll do what I can, or if I can't, we'll find somebody who can. But you're not alone. If you're talking about what's best for kids, you are absolutely not alone. And we're here to help.
Right. Yeah. Correct.
Well, I am so thankful and humbled that you, Dwight, Tia, Jessica, Derek, and Shayla are part of my PLN. And I know that our participants today would love to be a part of your PLN as well. So on the webinar itself, we have your Twitter handles there that everyone can link to. So we know, as all of you have said, the conversation, we have to keep leaning into conversation. It can't just be, obviously right now our country is dealing with this crisis. We have to continue to work and work and work, and the work's never going to stop. We have to continue to take action. And so we are going to have the conversation continue. So for those of you who have questions that didn't get answered today, you can still ask those questions. Jeremy is going to drop in a link in the chat that has a link to our creators community where we can continue the conversation. Also, Derek mentioned Twitter and PLNs. If you want to continue to connect and ask these questions, we have the hashtag What's Your Story, and feel free to interact with our panelists. Reach out on Twitter or also go to the What's Your Story hashtag and engage there. So I just want to say, on behalf of everyone watching, educators all around the nation and world, on behalf of WeVideo, thank you so much, Dwight, Tia, Jessica, Derek, and Shayla, for your words of wisdom, your guidance. I am so, again, humbled and lucky to have to be connected with you, and I'm looking forward to working alongside of you in this fight together. So thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you.